Let's talk about how you reach someone who constantly pulls away without losing yourself in the process. Because if you've ever loved an avoidant, you know the cycle. You get close, they retreat. You try to fix it, they shut down. And what happens next? You start chasing. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally. You're over-explaining, over-analyzing, over-giving, trying to be enough to pull them back in. Connection with an avoidant begins not by chasing them or trying harder to get closer, but by regulating your own emotional state first. When you're in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, their default response to emotional intensity is to pull back, shut down, or detach. It's not always because they don't care. It's because their nervous system becomes overwhelmed when they sense emotional pressure. The more you pursue with anxiety, urgency, or emotional overload, the more they retreat into their internal cave. This is where emotional regulation becomes your superpower. Emotional regulation is the ability to recognize your feelings without letting them control your behavior. It means you can feel anxious, hurt, or confused and still pause, breathe, and respond instead of react. In the context of an avoidant relationship, this creates an energetic shift. You stop becoming someone they need to protect themselves from and instead become someone who feels emotionally safe to be around. When you regulate your emotions, you're not minimizing how you feel. You're managing how you express those feelings. You stop over-explaining, stop trying to fix things too quickly, and you stop sending energy that screams, please don't leave me. That energy, even if unspoken, often triggers the avoidant's deepest fear, losing their autonomy. They may interpret your emotional pursuit as control, even when it's coming from love. Emotional regulation is about creating internal calm, which leads to external clarity. It allows you to say, I miss you, without panicking if they don't say it back right away, and gives you the capacity to hold space for your feelings without turning them into ultimatums or emotional fireworks. That doesn't mean you suppress your truth. It means you deliver it from a grounded place. And here's the paradox. The more emotionally steady you are, the more an avoidant starts to feel safe opening up. Why? Because you're not trying to invade their emotional world. You're simply inviting them into yours. That invitation is subtle but powerful. It's the difference between saying you need to change for me to feel okay and I feel okay and you're welcome to meet me here if you're ready. Avoidants don't build trust quickly. They test emotional environments first. And if that environment feels chaotic, reactive, or controlling, they withdraw. But if that environment feels calm, respectful, and non-demanding, they soften. Emotional regulation then becomes your access point, not to control them, but to stay centered in yourself. So the next time you feel the urge to text, explain, or fix, pause, check in with your nervous system, breathe through the anxiety. Remind yourself that connection doesn't come from pursuit, it comes from presence, from consistency, from being emotionally grounded enough to allow space while still holding your worth. Because ultimately, real connection, especially with someone who fears it, starts with the stability you bring, not the intensity you project. Avoidants are not attracted to emotional chaos. They are drawn to emotional calm. They gravitate toward people who have a strong sense of self, who don't need constant reassurance, and who can hold space for their own emotions without needing someone else to fix or validate them. This is what we call self-assured energy. It's the energy of someone who can say, I'm okay, with or without your validation, and mean it. Avoidantly attached individuals typically struggle with emotional intensity. They often grew up in environments where emotions were overwhelming, unreliable, or met with withdrawal. So when they encounter someone who is emotionally overexposed, constantly expressing neediness, over-explaining, or seeking constant closeness, it can feel threatening to them, not because the person is bad or wrong, but because it unconsciously activates their fear of being consumed, controlled, or emotionally flooded. That's why emotional overexposure doesn't create closeness with an avoidant. It creates distance. The more you try to make them see how much you care or try to prove your worth through emotional labor, the more they back away. To them, it feels like pressure, even if it's coming from a loving place. But self-assured energy is different. It doesn't seek approval. It holds its own. It's not loud or demanding. It's calm, composed, and deeply rooted in self-respect. That kind of energy makes the avoidant feel like they're not being cornered, but instead invited. There's no emotional demand. There's just openness and space. Think about it like this. Emotional overexposure is a floodlight. It's intense, bright, and overwhelming. But self-assured energy is like a steady candle. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't chase, but it still lights the room. It's consistent, it's warm, and it gives others the space to come closer on their own terms. In relationships with avoidant partners, your emotional composure becomes your greatest asset. That doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you express them from a place of inner stability. You're able to say how you feel without demanding that the other person fix it. You can communicate your needs without panic and hold your boundaries without drama. That's what creates safety for an avoidant partner because they don't feel emotionally hijacked. And ironically, it's your ability to not chase that makes you magnetic. When you're grounded, emotionally whole, and not dependent on their response to feel okay, the avoidant starts to feel safe. They start to see that you're not a threat to their independence. You're a safe space for connection. That's when the walls begin to come down. So if you want to connect with an avoidant heart, stop proving, stop performing, start embodying. Embody confidence, embody emotional steadiness, embody the message, I know who I am. I don't need to chase love. I am love. That's the shift that invites them in without ever having to run after them. When you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, one of the most common traps you fall into is trying to prove your worth. You overgive, overexplain, overextend, hoping that if you just do enough, love enough, show enough, they'll finally open up and choose you. But here's the truth. Avoidants don't respond to pressure, and they definitely don't respond to emotional convincing. You don't reach them by proving your worth, you reach them by living it. Proving your worth sends a subtle but powerful message. I'm not enough unless you say I am. It places your value in their hands. And for someone who fears intimacy and emotional responsibility, that kind of energy feels heavy. It makes them feel like they're being asked to carry your self-worth, which is precisely what they're trying to avoid. Avoidants are already overwhelmed by their own emotional world. They are not going to take on yours. Living your worth is different. It's quiet, steady, and self-contained. It's not about saying, look how valuable I am. It's about knowing it so deeply that you don't need external confirmation. You hold your standards. You set boundaries. You walk away from disrespect without dramatics. You choose self-respect over emotional performance. That kind of inner power isn't loud, but it's unmistakable. And more importantly, it's magnetic. When you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing yourself, something shifts, your energy changes. You stop trying to manage their responses or decode their distance. You focus on your own alignment, your peace, your healing, your truth. You start showing up as someone who doesn't chase because you don't need to. You're not trying to fit into someone's emotional limitations. You're building a life that already fits you. And here's the paradox. That's when the avoidant notices. Longer focused on getting a reaction, you create space for them to have one. When you're no longer bending to earn their closeness, you become someone they can actually respect and feel safe around. You're no longer an emotional pursuer. They don't have to run from you. You're solid, secure, and standing still. That's when the emotional door cracks open. Avoidants don't need you to explain your worth. They need to feel it. And they feel it when you embody it, when you respect yourself enough to not chase what runs, when you love yourself enough to stop settling for emotional crumbs, and when you honor your truth enough to let go of anything that keeps you small. Living your worth means you trust that who you are is already enough. You don't audition for love. You don't perform for validation. In relationships with avoidant individuals, one of the most counterintuitive truths is this: space activates their awareness more than closeness ever will. While closeness often triggers their defenses, space creates the conditions for reflection. It isn't rejection, it's regulation. And for someone with an avoidant attachment style, that space can do more to awaken emotional clarity than all the heartfelt conversations in the world. Avoidants are wired to fear emotional intensity. Closeness can feel overwhelming to them, not because they don't care, but because their nervous systems interpret vulnerability as unsafe. When you get too close, too fast, or too emotionally expressive, it may activate their impulse to withdraw. Their instinct is to protect themselves from what they perceive as pressure, expectations, or loss of autonomy. It's not personal, it's their emotional blueprint. That's why chasing them, explaining yourself repeatedly, or trying to force connection often backfires. It doesn't reassure them, it reinforces their need for distance. But when you step back, when you stop pushing for closeness, something shifts. That silence, that stillness, that space, it creates a mirror. In that mirror, the avoidant finally has the chance to feel what life is like without your presence constantly filling the emotional gap. When you're always there, always reaching out, always trying to make things work, they don't feel the impact of your absence. But when you stop showing up in that way, when you reclaim your emotional energy and pull back, not out of punishment, but out of self-respect, they notice, not immediately, and not always consciously. But slowly that space begins to stir something. That something is awareness. Awareness of how much emotional support you quietly provided. Awareness of how your presence grounded the connection. Awareness of the comfort they took for granted. Avoidants tend to devalue connection when it feels too available, but they start to reevaluate its importance when it's no longer guaranteed. That's when real thoughts begin to surface. Were they more important to me than I realized? Did I mistake their love for pressure? Why do I feel unsettled now that they're not around? Space isn't about playing games. It's about giving the avoidant room to feel their feelings without your emotional energy clouding their internal process. It's a boundary, not a tactic. It says, I'm not going to beg to be chosen. I'm going to honor myself. And if you want connection, you'll need to meet me halfway. In healthy relationships, space isn't distance, it's respect. It gives both people room to breathe, to reflect, and to choose each other freely. For avoidance, space isn't just helpful, it's necessary. It bypasses their emotional defenses and opens the door to genuine insight. So the next time you feel tempted to close the gap out of fear, remember, your silence is not emptiness. It's a container. And in that container, the avoidant finally has the chance to hear their own heart and realize what they've been avoiding isn't you. It's their feelings for you. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls or ultimatums, but in reality, boundaries are invitations to connection, to respect, to mutual emotional safety. And when they are enforced, not with anger, fear, or emotional chaos, but with calm self-respect, they become magnetic. Especially in relationships involving avoidant individuals, boundaries don't push people away. They create the conditions where healthy attraction and trust can actually grow. Avoidants are hypersensitive to emotional pressure. They tend to retreat when they sense someone becoming overly dependent, overly intense, or emotionally reactive. Only head over if you're. This doesn't mean they don't want connection. It means they want connection that doesn't compromise their emotional autonomy. When you set a boundary and stand by it without explaining it to death, without trying to control the outcome, and without seeking a particular reaction, you signal something powerful. I can love you and still choose myself. That kind of energy is rare, and it's compelling because it communicates that you are not emotionally starving. You're emotionally sovereign. You are not trying to earn worth through connection. You already know your worth. And you're not asking the avoidant to take care of your emotional experience. You're handling that internally. This is where the magnetism comes in. Calm boundaries draw people in because they radiate clarity. There's no confusion about what's okay and what there's no guessing where you stand. And most importantly, there's no emotional chaos clouding the message. For someone who fears being overwhelmed, that clarity is grounding. Now, let's be honest. Setting boundaries with an avoidant can feel risky. You worry they'll pull away or disappear altogether. But here's the truth. If your boundary scares them off, their connection to you was conditional on your self-abandonment. That's not love. That's emotional avoidance, and you don't want to build intimacy on the back of sacrificing your own needs. On the flip side, if they respect your boundary, even if it takes time, they'll start to see you differently, not as someone trying to trap them in emotional obligation, but as someone with inner structure, someone who doesn't just demand respect, but embodies it. When you calmly enforce a boundary, whether it's needing time for yourself, refusing to tolerate mixed signals, or choosing not to chase, you're not pushing them away. You're simply anchoring yourself. You're saying, this is who I am, and I'm not shrinking to make anyone stay. That creates both space and safety. Space for the avoidant to come closer on their own terms, and safety in knowing you're not emotionally unstable or unpredictable. In the end, boundaries are less about controlling others and more about communicating with the world how you expect to be treated. And when you can do that from a place of calm, grounded self-respect, you don't have to chase anyone because you become the kind of person who attracts the kind of connection that doesn't require chasing in the first place. Your emotional independence is the safest and most powerful signal you can send, especially in relationships involving avoidant individuals. While people often believe that vulnerability, constant reassurance, or open displays of affection will draw a distant partner closer, the truth is that nothing calms an avoidant more than sensing that you are emotionally self-contained. Emotional independence tells them, you don't have to manage my feelings. I've got me. Avoidants are deeply sensitive to emotional expectations because of their early experiences where emotional closeness may have felt unsafe, unreliable, or overwhelming. They tend to associate intimacy with obligation or loss of control. So when someone shows up with intensity, emotional dependency, or a need to be constantly reassured, it doesn't feel like love to them. It feels like pressure. That pressure triggers their defenses, and they instinctively pull away to regain a sense of space and safety. But when you demonstrate emotional independence through your words, actions, energy, they perceive something very different. You aren't asking them to be your emotional caretaker. You're not trying to extract security from them. You're not putting the weight of your identity or self-worth in their hands. And that, paradoxically, is what makes connection with you feel safe. You're not a threat to their autonomy. You're a partner who honors your own. Emotional independence isn't about emotional detachment. It's about emotional self-regulation. You still feel, you still care, you're still open to love, but you don't fall apart when someone pulls away. You don't abandon your dignity to chase after validation. You know how to soothe your own nervous system, process your own emotions, and return to a state of internal balance without needing another person to fix it for you. That kind of stability is rare, and avoidants, whether consciously or not, are drawn to it. Your independence gives them room to feel their own feelings rather than react to yours. It creates space in the connection where intimacy can breathe rather than feel suffocating. And it signals to them that if they choose to come closer, they're choosing it freely, not because they were guilted, cornered, or emotionally coerced. And here's the deeper truth. Emotional independence isn't just attractive, it's necessary. It keeps you from becoming addicted to a relationship dynamic where you're always proving, fixing, or waiting. It keeps your power intact. It allows you to love without losing yourself. And it ensures that if someone walks away, they're not taking your emotional well-being with them. So the next time you feel the urge to prove your love, double text, or over-explain your worth, Pause. Ground yourself. Remind yourself that the most magnetic thing you can offer anyone, especially someone with an avoidant style, is your self-trust, your steadiness,